So, Alex, Clara, 3 days of judging, an exhausting process, but a hugely thorough one. And we're now at the end of that process. Alex, you first. What are your perceptions of what you've assessed?
It's been really good to do it. It's been very thorough, as you've said, and I think we've really taken our time to tease out all the different strands of quality and style that we possibly could from what's been submitted to the competition. We've seen quite a diversity of approaches, styles and quality levels, and in some cases some extremely high quality coming out in a few different styles. Mainly the styles for which the region's most famous, so no great surprises there. But also I've been encouraged by some of the wines that have come up from styles I didn't expect to be tasting this week, and they've been delightful. And I'd like to think that that gives a signal maybe for where the region might look to turn in the future.
Yeah, which is an intriguing statement. So just elaborate on that, because everyone listening will be thinking, what were those styles?
Well, I think there are two ways to look at it. We come to the region at quite a poignant moment in its history, I think, bearing in mind that less than 2 weeks ago, Dr. John Gladstone's, who's the man who first suggested that this would be a very good place to plant vines back in the 60s, passed away. Mm. And that gives us a chance both to reflect on how young the region is, really. Within one human lifespan, it's attained a reputation that is very considerable worldwide, and also to reflect on where it might go in the next human lifespan as it develops as a region. The results today and over the last few days, I think, have confirmed that planting Chardonnay and Cabernet in Margaret River in particular, and in some other areas of WA as well, was a very good idea. And so one question that comes up is how to develop those styles and ensure that they remain fascinating and relevant and delicious into the future. But then also to see what else could happen with alternative varieties. I was not expecting to try a Touriga this week. No. And had I been expecting it, I might not have expected it to be delicious. Mm-hmm. It was. Mm-hmm. It was both here and it was lovely. Mm-hmm. And that suggests that perhaps there are pockets where Mediterranean varieties, which are of course gathering ground elsewhere in Australia, could also thrive here. Chenin is another one, which has a much longer history, of course, and a richer volume of history in WA, not always necessarily at the high quality end. But here we are, we've seen some good examples, some in an oakier style, some fresher and leaner. And that kind of experimentation, I think, is going to be very necessary so that the diversity of wines in WA can be fully explored and the cream can rise to the top.
Yeah. And what about you, Clara? What's your perception after 3 days of extensive tasting here?
I think Alex's point about what happens or what can happen with focus and with skill in one lifetime is a really, really good one. The excitement about what can happen in another lifespan is also really exciting in terms of other varieties that we've seen, because I'm sure we'll get around to talking about Chardonnay and Cabernet, but other varieties, especially whites, have been really exciting. Fianos, Albariños, Rieslings even, and yes, Chenin. It's been really, really enlightening for me, because in the UK, our perception is a 2-variety horse race. And it's very clear after these 3 days that that's not true. It's been really encouraging to be able to explore the skill and in terms of other varieties or non-conventional varieties, which I think is a very interesting title, and we'll get around to market perception, I'm sure. But there's been some really beautiful Chenins for me, some really exciting Chenins, and even a couple of Fianos that I got a bit excited about.
Yes.
Which is really cool.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Alex, you preside over this assessment process ordinarily in London as a member of the senior judging committee for the IWSC, and you're making your own assessments, you're dipping into what we're doing as judges, you're assessing and reassessing medal winners. How do you go about bringing the competition to a location like this?
It's a really interesting exercise because it's really an extension of what we aim to do when judging in London. Bearing in mind that the London judging covers an enormous number of countries and styles and regions in the entries that it considers. And so just taking that challenge to begin with, the job of the committee is to work out both in principle and then in practice how to apply one consistent set of standards across the world of wine, which is easier said than done in some cases, although when you really boil it down, you end up coming to fundamental questions about what wine quality is. And I think those questions can be answered fairly universally. In other words, we're looking for wines that are delicious, that express a sense of place, that have a balance and a refreshment value as a drink, and tell a story. And there are very many ways to achieve that end, and to welcome the diversity of ways in which that can be achieved is, I think, a very necessary part of a global competition. So we're not looking to standardize taste, but we are looking to standardize standards of taste. And so I see my role here in the region really in the same vein, to do that, to come here and oversee a panel of wonderful judges, some from the UK and some from Australia, and to ensure that the standards that we set out when designing the rubric of this competition are applied in a way that highlights the best of what we feel can be achieved in the region.
And it's been wonderful as a judge to judge alongside those Australian judges as well. It's been just fantastic and enriching exercise, I think, hasn't it? You're nodding. Furious agreement. No, it's true. It's true.
I think the first of all, the standardization of quality that Alex is talking about is exactly what we aim for. And this experience, coming here and judging in a region, you worry that you'll get almost sort of sucked into the philosophy, and you'd sort of lose your context a little bit, which is not the goal. The goal is to invite us here and to judge within our own context, our own markets, and see how that works with judges that are here, that live here, that work here. And it's been a really, really rewarding experience to do that. The wonderful thing about doing that is that you come and you meet people for the first time and you already speak the same language, which is really, really rewarding. The reasons that one judge might absolutely adore a wine and really gun for it are the same reasons that another judge might really hate it, but at least we're speaking the same language, and then it becomes a debate, and we've had plenty of those over the last 3 days. So I think what we look to do when we come away is to find out if actually what we know and what we experience stacks up at cellar door, if you like. And for judges, it's a rewarding conversation to be had with a winemaker that's not in the room, because what they're looking for, the winemakers, is instead of having what they refer to as sort of cellar palate, I think, to see if when they're in their bubble, does that step up to a global context? And I think we found that it really does. So hopefully it's been a very good conversation to be had.
Yeah, and there is, as you say, plenty of debate. It's worth just briefly noting, Alex, this is a competition that has a reputation as one of the very toughest.
I think that's fair, and I wouldn't want to dispute that, and I'm not going to dispute that. There are some competitions that have a reputation for giving away a lot of medals. Almost, you might say, for giving away a medal for turning up. And this is not one of those competitions, because for us, even to award a bronze medal does imply a certain high standard. These are not just wines that are free of faults, technical faults. These are wines with positive aesthetic merit that we would like to think people will really enjoy drinking. That's the baseline for a medal here. That is bronze right there. And then when you go up to silver, necessarily that has to be a markedly different level of quality to differentiate itself from the bronzes. We're looking really for wines of texture and dimension and storytelling and originality. The silver level, it's a very, very high bar. And we came away, I think, with a lot of silvers this year, and those wines are all to be admired and commended. And then, of course, there is the gold level, and that represents a pinnacle. Perhaps a reference to Burgundy could be mentioned here. Grand Cru is 1% of Côte d'Or vineyards, and our gold medal haul is several times higher than that. So there are pickier systems in operation in the world. But this is a pretty picky one. And I think that's really important, because while it feels sometimes a little bit cheeky to come here having never made a wine and to judge other people's efforts, at the same time, we know that some wines are better than others. And while we respect the effort, we have to reward the result. And that's what we've come here to do.
And
it's by no means just to come off the back of that. Bronze is by no means a participation medal.
no,
That
goodness
is
me, no.
not what it is at all. You don't get a bronze just by entering. A bronze is an award, and there's plenty of wines that were absolutely fine, but they were not medal worthy, and therefore they don't get a medal. That doesn't mean that they are wrong or faulty, as you say, but bronze is something special. Silver is real accomplishment. That is, and again, it's humbling to come here and judge other people's work when I've never made wine. It's very humbling. But gold is, as you say, a pinnacle. And if we're comparing it to Burgundy, that's the Grand Cru. We're not saying it's Burgundian in style.
No.
It's a very, very small slice of a niche, and it's real accomplishment. It means that that's something really special.
Yeah, absolutely. And you may never have made a wine, and neither have I, incidentally, but you buy an awful lot of it. Both of
we
you.
taste enough of it.
You taste a large amount of it as well, So what are the opportunities, do you think, Alex first, for Margaret River?
I think the opportunities are, well, they're already being explored, because according to to our hosts here and the stats, Margaret River exports more wine to the UK than it does to most markets, although it remains quite domestic market focused, as I understand it. But stylistically, I think there remains an opportunity, because what we've seen that in the main, Margaret River is at its best when offering a fairly well-defined, medium-bodied, structured, fairly fresh style. And that applies to both Cabernet and Chardonnay, and also some of the other varieties that we've encountered. I would say the same, in fact, across a lot of WA in the other regions that have cropped up in the competition, although I would love to see more of those in the future, because at just 18%, I know that they're underrepresented in the first year we've allowed them in. That aside, it's right on the money for what we're looking for at the moment in the UK. The blockbuster style has receded from the fashion of the day. And I would say that in general, although I know some winemakers here, from having spoken to them, felt a certain pressure in the late 90s and 2000s to beef up their style, particularly in red wines, I think in practice they've resisted that trend more than in many other regions across the world, France and elsewhere. And for that reason, I think there is a natural constraint and finesse that can be found in the wines here that people will enjoy. They just need to discover them.
Yeah, and same question to you.
Yeah, I would agree. It's incredibly encouraging. It's a time, in terms of a lifespan of a wine region and the identity of what a wine can really be. What gold is power and strength under restraint and guidance. And I think, speaking to the winemakers this week, they're quite relieved and excited to not have to create these big commercial styles, and that's really encouraging. That's the opportunity to actually go for it, and that wine you want to make that's a bit understated, has a bit of finesse. That's what we want. That's where it is, and that's what the opportunity is. The opportunity is actually now it's coming up to a peak where we don't want to see big commercial styles. We don't want to see big, heavy-handed winemaking. We want to see restraint, and we want to see real finesse. And those are the wines that the winemakers want to make by the sound of things when they talk to us, and when we've tasted away from the judging table and even at the judging table. And that's the opportunity, is to make that wine that you want to make.
And Alex, where do you see those wines going in the UK market?
In terms of market channels?
Yes.
I mean, for example, well, when talking about Margaret River, first and foremost, it is a fairly premium region. It's small. The prices are comparatively high within an Australian context, and therefore, coupled with smaller volumes, you're not necessarily going to be seeing it all over the supermarkets. And I think that's fine. I think these are wines that deserve to be enjoyed with food. They belong in restaurants, and of course, people eat at home as well. So they deserve to buy them in independent merchants where perhaps they can have some guidance and have the wines and the context explained, and then take them home and enjoy them with their cooking as well. So yes, I want to see them on tables, be it domestically or in restaurants, with people who can really savor the refreshment value and the precision of those wines.
And restaurants, premium, hello.
I mean, I was going to try and offer a well-rounded view on that, but I'm obviously going to say restaurants is definitely at the table. I hear a rumor that people eat at home. I mean,
don't worry.
Apparently,
It's to be discouraged.
Sure, but for me, it's always about the right restaurant setting, because that's where we get real advocates, and they're talking about your somms on the floor, wine managers in restaurants, things like that, where we really want to talk about wines we love, and we do it hopefully with brevity at the table. But that for me is the setting that I see Margaret River and all of West Australian wines actually. It's whether they are more sort of cheerful and cheeky, lower down the price end with by the glass options, and there's plenty of those. That's been really encouraging. Or whether it's at quite a high end premium, super premium on the list, where it needs a bit of explanation and it needs food, and that's when these wines really sing.
Yeah, and talking of wine singing, we've talked about how much we've loved the diversity of what we tasted here, but we also mentioned that we have to talk about Chardonnay and we have to talk about Cabernet, because those are the calling cards of this region.
They are, and I think for good reason. It's funny to consider that, especially now, after there's been more experimentation and refinement within regions around the world, I can't think of another premium region where Cabernet and Chardonnay walk hand in hand like this. You might 20 years ago have said Napa, but Chardonnay has moved west in California to find its real spiritual home. Of course, they've always been separate in France and be seen as very distant foreign cousins there. But even if you look at central Italy, they excel in neighboring regions, not together. And so that raises interesting questions about how they can coexist so happily here. And I think what we do see is that more restrained style of Cabernet, which really resists being pushed to the level of overripeness and extract that has been more easy to accomplish during the period of that being fashionable 15 years ago. And then Chardonnay that does have quite an amplitude to it. That said, it feels to me that some wineries here are trying to resist and control that natural amplitude. And I would say that's something that they need to be a little bit careful of, perhaps, because Chardonnay, after all, is a grape that starts off neutral and can be encouraged to express a vast wealth of vineyard information and textural beauty in the right hands. And the prevailing tendency here to block malolactic, sulfur early, and bottle within a year, I just wonder, maybe capping its potential. And it would be very interesting to see a few more examples of Chardonnay that are allowed to mature longer on lees with mallow, maybe in some barrels, not all. I've never felt there's been a lack of acidity here, but sometimes it's rather too high. And if we want that level of malic acidity, then I think there's always Riesling. So a little bit more amplitude and free reign in Chardonnay is something I would love to see in the future from the region. Could be very exciting and take it up another level.
Yeah, and on that, Cabernet, how do you see that developing?
Cabernet is one of those grapes that it's, at the moment, not super fashionable, even though a lot of people drink it. And it's a grape that I love because when well made, and there's not always that much latitude there, it has a wonderful sense of architecture and purity and structure, but with fruit at the core. And that's certainly possible here. And I think maybe developing individuality within that is going to be the key, retaining the lovely fruit that occurs naturally here. And at this point, I would call out oak selection as being key. This would apply to whites as well. It's encouraging to see people, especially with some of the secondary varieties like Cabernet Franc, experimenting with larger format barrels and different toast levels and so on. But I would also impart the message or the recommendation that applies universally, which is you have to be on your Cooper's case all the time. Those who shout loudest get the best balance.
Yes.
And we tasted a handful of examples this week that were clearly hampered by not the best barrels.
It's such a shame.
And you think this is lovely fruit growing in a very suitable place.
Yes.
And the oak is just second rate, and that's not good enough. And I think another thing that came out from some of the discussions with winemakers as well as the show itself is the bravery to blend below the 85% level. And I completely appreciate that from a commercial point of view, having Cabernet Sauvignon on the label is helpful. In some cases, I wondered if there would be more dimension and interest in the wines if they were maybe 80 or 75. And to make, again, comparisons with other regions, just because they have shown it's possible to excel and sell sub 85% Cabernet blends. We have Bordeaux, where that's the norm, and we have California, where they have a different cutoff, and 75% is when the point at which they're allowed to label varietally as Cabernet, but have demonstrated that actually using that latitude has led to some very interesting blending options. And perhaps here it would be interesting, especially given I think the quality of some of the Cabernet Franc that we've enjoyed in the course of our explorations, and Malbec as a blender as well, that could give some more colour to the choir of Margaret River Cabernet.
Yeah. There is this exciting, vibrant fruit, isn't there?
Yeah,
It's
honestly, it's to come to your point about blending and labeling. This is a really hot topic because this is coming away from maybe winemaking and but also perception and market perception. For me, in the UK, when I'm listing a wine or when we're talking about wines on a wine list, I'd rather see a name of a wine as a blend rather than a single varietal labeling and then find out there's a bit of something else in there. You know, I'd rather see go for the blend. Blend and make that the signature, the wine there. And I was quite surprised to find out how winemakers here go, well, we shouldn't possibly do that. It has to be a Cabernet. And then maybe we can sneak in some of the fruit you're really excited about. The Malbecs, the Petit Verdot, the Mataro or more red, a bit of that.
It's not like you're not allowed to put Cabernet on the label if you're below 85. You just have to list the others as well.
Sure.
And if they don't mean so much to the consumer, I tend to think that they will be ignored rather than seen as a negative. And you'll still see Cabernet Sauvignon.
There's this deception.
Top of the bill.
Exactly. And there's this deception and this myth that blends are inferior. But we've been buying Bordeaux for how long?
Yeah, about 1,000 years.
Feels like a million. So that I would say is something that I was quite surprised about, and I would love to feed that back to winemakers. To say, and it is that message of go for the wine you want to make. But to come back to your point about Chardonnay, if I can just reverse.
Yes, of course.
The conversation a bit. We've seen such a huge breadth of styles of Chardonnay and medal winners, and I mean the silvers and the golds. It's not like there's one recipe. There's gold we've seen in Chardonnay where we've got very restrained, pure sort of Salinus styles, and then we've got really reductive, richer, more, what's the word? Feral styles that I enjoy. But hopefully what we're seeing on all gold medal winners is a concentration and balance throughout, no matter which style they're making. So that's been really, really good to see.
Yeah, and we're competing with a bit of beeping. No, it's stopped now, which is great, because that's really distracting. I know you felt quite strongly that there's this, we all have this reference point, of course, a global benchmark for Chardonnay, Burgundy, global benchmark for Cabernet, Bordeaux, to an extent Napa. But I know you feel quite strongly, Cara, that we don't want to obsess too much about that.
Yeah. I would really encourage people to, although fine, Burgundy is always going, for Chardonnay, is always going to be a reference point, as should it be. And talking about clones out here is fascinating. Getting into quite a passionate debate with winemakers about clones and Burgundian clones and not straying too far from a certain recipe, shall we say. But I would encourage people to look outside of Burgundy when it comes to top Chardonnays. There is a world of wine out there, and yes, California, but also South Africa. And there are some really exceptional Chardonnays in South Africa, and lots to be learned from what is successful there. So I would really, I would love to see a little bit more of that courage to stray from a rule book.
Yeah, and markets there for that courage, do you think, from your experience?
I think breaking into a market like the UK that is both saturated and in decline is always incredibly hard. At the same time, people do like wine in the UK, and they like good wine, and importers like to represent wines that they feel are not just excellent but a point of difference, and that they can go and suggest to people is something they ought to try, that's maybe new and exciting and wonderful. And as such, there's always room for something exceptional.
Yeah. And in terms of a takeaway piece of advice, because you've both communicated some really fantastic advice for those producers that we have been here to help, to serve to an extent. Humbly, yes. In terms of a kind of takeaway, if you could, Alex, you're sort of, as I say, you've covered off some advice already. I appreciate that. But what would be your kind of handy takeaway based on your experience the last week over here for the producers in Margaret River?
I would say be willing to experiment. Don't get rid of the past. Don't forget the heritage, but always look forward and question what you can do better.
And same question to you.
Oh, it's so annoying when he puts it so succinctly.
You can do that too.
I mean, I'm not going to say it better than that, but courage to do that. And I think, as your point you made about barrels and really digging into that as well, because we have seen some fantastically beautiful fruit, unfortunately put in oak that isn't worthy of it, maybe. But and I would say also just lean into those different varieties as well, and have courage in that sense. We've seen some excellent other varieties, basically some varieties outside of Chardonnay and Cabernet, and I would really lean into that.
The region has proven itself that it is top tier. Now it's time really to get into the details and to imagine, dare to dream.
Dare to dream. There you go.
And courage.
And confidence. I think they deserve. They've earned that.
There is no doubt. The region has come of
And
age.
imagination is it, isn't it? We had a whole conversation about imagination.
Yes.
That's now the limiting factor, I think, in winemaking. So much is so well understood technically, especially in a country like Australia that really leads the way in winemaking and viticultural research. That's not the limiting factor anymore. No. The limiting factor is going to be the imagination of the owners and winemakers who tend the land in this beautiful region.
Dare to dream. Clara, Alex, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great chat.